this session. This morning we are really honored to have Mr. Raghav Chandra, and we are here to discuss his very powerful and insightful novel called Kali's Daughther. And I think I'm going to start off by quickly, if you've not read the novel, I think it's important that you know a little bit about it. So I'm just going to quickly read a short summary of the novel, and then I think we will continue our conversation. On a chilly November morning in Geneva, Deepika Thakur prepares to address the United Nations Human Rights Council. Despite her personal experience of oppression as a Dalit woman, she must claim that the Indian government remains firmly committed to eradicating caste-based discrimination in the country. As echoes of humiliation and atrocities flood her memory, Deepika is transported back in time to almost 6 years ago, when she became the first member of her family to be selected for the Indian Civil Services. She had moved from Bhopal, her hometown, to Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration in Missouri to prepare for a career as a civil servant. It was here that she met Aman, an upper caste Brahmin, and Vijay, a fellow Dalit. Both relationships defined by caste and class politics, Deepika had found herself in the crosshairs of an ancient history built on inequality and prejudice. Yet, as a diplomat from India's civil foreign service, she must deny caste and the fact that India's fractured society, for all its facade of modernization and progress, remains stuck in the Middle Ages. Her father's words come back to haunt her. When you cannot fight the system, you must endure. Will Deepika fight back? Will she endure? What will she say to the Human Rights Council? How will she represent India to the rest of the world? So that's a short summary of the novel. When I read the novel, I was just talking to Mr. Raghav this morning, and I think I said I got quite worked up as I was reading, because it makes you quite angry and emotional at the same time, because he touches upon a very difficult subject matter to talk about, a very important subject matter to talk about, but very difficult to talk about. But I think he does that very, very beautifully. I think. And also when you talk about caste system, I think what I find really interesting about this book is that when you talk about caste system in India, we think of the rural part of India, or we think about small towns and villages, and we think about people who are maybe a little uneducated. But in this book delves into people belonging to the Indian administrative services, foreign services, and how they look at caste system and how they deal with the issue of caste system. I think that is what makes this book very, very, very insightful and very, very interesting. And I think I think we are going to have a we talked a lot this morning, a very organic, I think, conversation, and maybe I told Sir that perhaps we should start off with on a lighter note by asking him a little bit about, becoming a writer. You're also a civil servant, but you also like to write. And how did you, get to writing? How did you, get this passion for writing?
So, Kimi, I always had a great love for writing, and I did write op-eds, and I wrote, little pieces for various magazines and all that. But I never really seriously got down to writing, because my job as a civil servant, and having been a relatively proficient civil servant, I was always very engaged, and I never really had time for writing. And it is only with the advent of the laptop and the fact that one could, write something, correct it, cut, paste, and revise anything very easily, that I really got hooked on to writing in a big way. And twice in my life, in my career of 36 years as a very engaging, engrossing civil servant, I've had two periods where, because of various reasons, I was posted to what people perceived were relatively less important jobs. So, and I didn't want to kind of allow myself to feel despondent. So I began writing. I had ideas in my mind, I had the topic in my mind, but I wanted to pen it down. So the first one was The Scent of a Game, which I wrote, which is about tiger poaching and endangered species trafficking in the context of conservation, and the history of shikar and hunting I brought out. That was when, in 2006, suddenly tigers, despite our having protected national parks, two of them, Sariska and Panna, had no tigers left. And so much so that our Prime Minister ordered a CBI inquiry into the vanishing of tigers. So it's based around that. And this one I wrote sometime around 2015, 16, and I finished it in 2018, again when I was on a job, moved out from an 18-hour-a-day job to a relatively easier job, and I was wanting to write a story about this subject of tribals and Dalits, but I chose the subject of Dalits because I was already posted in a constitutional body which dealt with tribals, and I thought that a larger part of our society would be covered if I wrote it in the context of the Dalits. And so writing has been a passion. It's just that I've got this liberation only when I've been on jobs where I had time for myself.
That's wonderful. This morning when we spoke, I could see that you had a lot of love for your protagonist, your main character, Deepika Thakur. Can you tell us a little bit about her character?
Yeah, Deepika is a character that I feel very closely and warmly, affectionately for. I am rather protective about her. And Deepika is the daughter of a very low-ranking civil servant, a project officer who has never been in the mainstream. He handles a veterinary institute and is a Dalit. His original name was Prem Kishan Chamar. And the Chamar surname in India relates to skin and tanning. So his father's historical ancestral profession was skinning of animals, and therefore he was the lowest caste. And Deepika is the first person in their families to ever join a formal national level civil service. So it causes great rejoicing. And Deepika is a very self-educated person because none of her parents have been able to really impart to her the kind of education which was required to appear for the civil services. She's quite a confident girl. She's a very balanced, a very stable-minded, emotionally very stable person. And despite the vicissitudes that she's faced in her life in school, she's been harassed for her caste because her father at one stage drops the surname Chamar. And he is no longer Chamar, he's just Prem Kishan. And he adopts the surname Thakur because the Thakur surname is common to the tribals, it is common to the upper castes, it's common to various communities. It's like Kumar. And so it's to camouflage his caste that he adopts that surname, and so she becomes Deepika Thakur. But school children have always ridiculed her because those who've known that she had the surname Chamar earlier, they ridicule her. And despite all that, and despite the various things that happen in her life, she's a very pleasant person. She's good looking, although dark complexioned, which in India sometimes causes people to sort of delve a little into why you are so dark, and they relate it to your caste or they relate it to your upbringing. But she is a very athletic person and a person who is determined to succeed in life, to meet her challenges, but without upsetting people or without hurting people.
Coming to the change of name, I would like to read a few lines. When Deepika Thakur's father was asked by his boss is Ranjit Singh, and he tells her father, drop the dirty Chamar in your name, keep some indistinguishable surname like Verma, Kumar, Chaudhary, or Thakur. Let other bastards keep guessing what your jat is. So you'll be safe from at least the first layer of contempt. I thought this was extremely interesting, changing your surname, and Sir also quoted, I think, "What's in a Name" by Shakespeare, and. I thought this was extremely interesting, but I also really was, in a way, saddened by the line that says, "So you'll be saved from at least the first layer of contempt." That means that there's so many more layers. So you may be saved from the first layer, but then there's so many layers. And if you read the book, you'll see that when Deepika Thakur was introduced as Deepika Thakur to her boyfriend's parents, and the more the mother asks her about where she comes from, she realizes that she thought she was a Rajput, but when she realizes that she's a Dalit, she freaks out. She's extremely, extremely worked out. When she so I did ask her. I told him I'm going to ask him. So is it worth it? Is it worth it for you to change your name in order to be saved from that first layer of contempt, when there's so much more contempt that is going to follow you later on in life? Because as soon as you're trying to forge a closer relationship, such as marriages, people are going to dig out where you are from. So
sociologically speaking, we have the concept of Sanskritization, which has been analyzed by sociologists like M.N. Srinivas and Andre Bete, where they have talked of lower castes wanting to improve their profile and changing their customs and their rituals to sort of equate themselves with the upper castes. But the name is the very first thing that you respond to when somebody tells you their name. And the moment you are told that your surname is something like a Chamar or a Jatav, or any such name, or a Kuril, or any name which reveals that you're a Dalit, people sort of segregate you immediately. Historically in India, we've had a situation where Dalits had to first shout out and announce that they were coming on a road so that others could step aside and move out, and they would not necessarily be defiled by them. But today, despite the changes that have come about, and economic growth has changed a lot of India. We are transforming fast. Divisions and distinctions have become blurred. Yet, at a psychological level, those distinctions still remain. And it is more to do with the human being, with how we are as individuals, that we are not really able to still treat everybody as equal, because we like to maintain our own natural distinctions. And therefore, changing a name helps, because as I said, it prevents you from the first layer of contempt. But there are several other layers, and that is, as you get to know a person, you want to sit separately. So in this book, for instance, on the dining table, if you remember in the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy, Rajesh, the Thakur, who's a true Rajput, doesn't want to sit with Deepika, and he wants to eat separately. He doesn't want to be seen with her alone. He doesn't want to really, hang around with her directly. So there are various layers of contempt which are constantly there, and people who are perceptive will realize that there is a difference. So it's important to sort of keep your name of which Mr. Ranjit Singh, her father's boss. And it is only when a situation arises where her father has massaged the feet of the boss, where the boss has fallen so unwell that he's nursed him like a missionary, and that he feels like giving him this advice that, look, why don't you do away with your surname? You're a handsome man, you're tall, you're athletic, and it'll help your children in their careers if you do not have the Chamar surname. It is like like a racehorse being tied to a donkey. So you should remove the donkey.
Yeah, another comment, another really interesting thing about this book is when Deepika Thakur passed her civil service exam, she had opted for foreign service, and her parents were very, very disappointed because they wanted her to become an IS officer so that she continues to stay in the country. Of course, they can show her off a little bit. She would have her car, she would have protection. So they really wanted her to become an IS officer and not become, not work in the foreign service. But another thing that that I thought was very, very insightful for me, and that made me really sad was another reason why the parents, even her later on, really did not maybe thought she should have changed. She should have become an IS officer and not a diplomat, was because somewhere she felt that perhaps she does not deserve to become a diplomat who goes outside outside India to represent. And I thought that really gave me an insight into how the Dalits have been oppressed for so long that it has in many ways killed your soul and your psyche and the way you think, the way you perceive yourself, the way you perceive your worth. What are you worth, right? Perhaps you're not even worthy to represent your country outside. And I thought that was a great insight. If you would like to comment on that a little
So
bit.
I'll read out a few lines from my book where her parents are very upset that she hasn't joined the IS because it will give them immediate material visibility of progress before their peer group of Dalits and others and help to improve their status directly. But so she's lying, she shuts herself up in her room and she's crying. And then her cousin rings her up and she says, Deepu, why you should join the foreign service? And she says, no, but it's not correct for me, and so on. She says, no, our blood is weak. That's why we are scared of the foreign service. Don't you want to travel? And then she entices her and says, get hold of a good, attractive boy, a murga, and grab him by the balls. And she says, no, I'm shy. She says, scout, search, sniff. Every community has a giveaway smell, none as powerful as ours. Don't be put off if the boy lacks some confidence, dresses awkwardly, looks older with gray hair, has weathered skin, and is less handsome than the other boys. When I noticed, and she's talking of her own this thing, when I noticed Ghasi at the Postal Training Institute, he introduced himself with, hello, how you are? My good name is Mr. Ghasiram Paswan. He wore a striped tie over a checked shirt. Then he said, important for important, and clothes for clothes. So I guessed instantly that he was my man. He's darker than me. When you see him, you'll shriek, Didi, who have you caught? You remember those photographic negatives you find hidden inside the wedding albums from our parents' days? He's like that. But so what? And then she added, most importantly, Ghasi is dependable because he's one of us. And so on, And she went earlier when she's joined, when she had gone for counseling to one of her father's mentors, Mrs. Bose, and asked her for advice. Should I fill up my choice of service as the IAS or the foreign service? Mrs. Bose says that, there are so many categories and distinctions. Everyone's trying to classify you in India, that the only time you will be truly an Indian is when you are out of the country.
Yeah, that was very, very interesting as well. Okay, so coming back to, you talked a little bit about, why was it important for you to write about caste issue? And I also wanted you to ask, why in particular, in the context of the Indian administrative and foreign services, why did you write, in the context of
Yeah, so
civil
Kimi, as you started off on your correctly, the caste historically has been dealt with in literature as a very physical sort of thing. in the context of rural India, in the context of Dalits' houses being burnt, Dalits being exploited, Dalits women being raped, and so on. But never has anything been written in the context of a modern India where we still have vestiges of this system in our body language, in the way we talk, in the way we behave with people, in the way it's a more nuanced thing now. Although we still, and I must confess as an administrator and as a public commentator, that we still have occasional incidents of somebody, as I've mentioned in my book, a wedding procession being stoned because a Dalit has ridden a horse, or there is a band which is, celebrating a Dalit wedding with music. We still have Dalits being, we had an incident of a tribal being urinated upon. And we do have those occasional incidents, but India has changed and transformed dramatically. But in the minds of human beings, and this has nothing to do with government, it has to do with us as individuals, we still have caste which sort of dwells on our mind. And I was posted in the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, and I was part of a committee which dealt with atrocities of the weaker sections. And that's when I saw the hundreds of applications and complaints which reached us, and I looked at all of them and I said, look, here is something which I, as a more educated person, as a person who is more sensitive, should be able to cover and write about, which others who are not in the field, because as a civil servant, I've held 36 years of public service jobs in the field, in the secretariat, where I've met people who've been junior to me, junior colleagues who have been Dalits, senior colleagues, my own equivalents, and therefore I think I have a better appreciation of what they go through.
I think, I think your role as a civil servant, I think you already touched upon it. My question was about, did all these things that you write come from, the things that you saw and experienced? And it looks like...
yes, to a great extent, yes. I've been conscious of everything that I've written about, so as not to exaggerate it. At moments, yes, there is some stylistic freedom, to highlight a particular event as this thing, but it is meant to convey a story, and it is part of a narrative so that the reader gets a complete sense of a complete picture of what exactly happens and could possibly happen. Yeah.
I think I also see your hope for change in this book through some of the characters. For example, we have Aman, of course, who was in love with Deepika Thakur. At some point said, he tells his friend Rajesh, and he says, look, Rajesh, it's your feudal upbringing that views me like a stud bull, a selfish gene. I just have this one life. I don't owe the evolution of the Brahmin genome nothing, anything. About time it gets spliced or mutated. Is this a message that you're trying to send the society? This is about time the Brahmin gene is sliced and mutated.
In subtle ways, yes. It is also a message, but it is also, yes, it is something which is imperative that we, as a society, as human beings, we do away with any form of inequality, any form of discrimination, and any form of, looking down upon others who are not as privileged as us, whether they are disabled or whether they are poor or whether they are unhappy in any way.
All right. I think of all the many praises that you got for this book, I really like this one that said, this work will allow us to see ourselves in a new perspective. And it made me think a lot about, this work. I don't think this work is just about, judging people, or, critiquing, the country India or people who discriminate the Dalits, but it also allows us to have perspective about ourselves, our own prejudices about the way we look at people. We all have our own prejudices, and I think it helps us to have new perspective about people and the society we live in. Would you like to comment a little bit on this?
Well, it is we have to evolve constantly and improve ourselves. And with so much, especially with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and various covenants that have emerged from that, it is about time that every one of us looked upon that seriously. And whether it is minorities or whether it is Dalits, we have to be more equitable to everyone, and it must come within us. And government and can only do so much. They can bring in laws, they can bring in protective safeguard schemes, they can have positive discrimination or affirmative action, but ultimately it is for individuals and societies to improve themselves. And so this is really a book which is a lesson which has a message for human beings, for all of us, to look within, to introspect, to become better, to be like, in some ways, Aman sort of exemplifies the person that all of us should aspire to be. So while he is affected by his situation, despite being a third-generation civil servant, despite being a high caste Brahmin, despite having all the privileges in the world, he is a very sensitive and a very positive-minded person who provides Deepika the kind of love, the kind of comfort which she does not get from anybody else. And despite Rajesh being a very person who also has had all the privileges and all that, but in what he says, the way he talks, and there is a particular line which, where he is rather abusive, where he says that, God created, Dalits and women for the same purpose, and to be pressed and to be oppressed, and so on. So, and despite this girl, Arundhati, despite her privileged background, she's also not quite as sensitive. And even within her career, in her own service, she finds that some people are very nice and some people are cynical, they are sarcastic. So there is need for all of us to become better human beings. And that is the underlying message which I hope goes out through this book.
With that very positive note, I think we will open the floor for questions. If you have any questions. All right.
My question to you, sir, is I was very intrigued by the name Kali's daughter. I want to know why Kali's daughter. It could have been Durga's daughter, but why Kali?
So let me read out quickly a passage which relates to this. So, she's reflecting on her period in school, and where people have mocked her, they've troubled her, they've snatched away her books because she's good at studies. Huh? And one day, a girl, because she has long flowing hair, a girl who's jealous of her cuts her hair. And then she cries and all that, and she goes up and her parents console her. It's going to take 2-3 minutes. The worst cut came when people insisted on knowing her caste. The clever ones knew Thakur was only a shield, a camouflage. They persisted until she was forced to reveal Chamar, and then they would sneer that they had guessed that in the first place, or smirk to suggest about a person's background couldn't remain hidden for long. Some would taunt the academic or career prospects of a Chamar and the pointlessness of their education, blah, blah, blah. Despite and the good ones would say, despite the fact that she's a Chamar, I wasn't rude. I spoke to her with gentle tamiz. Such incidents repeated in quick succession and continued over a length of time, at times made her feel defective by birth. Sometimes she cursed her luck, and at other times she wept before her grandparents. She used to stay with her grandparents in school. Other than offering compassion, they admitted that they were powerless and had no idea what they should do. One day, she too had hidden a pair of scissors in her school bag to eke out her revenge. But her grandmother discovered them. She calmed her anger but pulled her ears. Then her father had learnt about it and had rushed to talk to her. With a wealth of ingrained knowledge culled from years of belittling experience, he cautioned her, Deepu, we can't afford to make mistakes or annoy anybody if we are to rise beyond our current status. Be observant, be calm, be patient. Yet another time, anguished by the continuous struggle to be given a just treatment, she burst out crying and banged her fists against her father. How am I different from the other kids? What have I done wrong? Why should everybody be after me? He wiped her tears, pulled her hair back, and kissed her forehead. Then he consoled her. Nobody can put us down, he said. We have God's protection. Even Gandhiji said that we are Harijans, God's own people. So, I'm God's own woman, he said with tears in his eyes. He held her cheeks to his palms and gazed into her eyes with a feeble smile. You are Kali's daughter.
That's beautiful.
I guess the book is an extraordinary novel and a contemporary too. So my question could be, do you view writing as a kind of spiritual practice, or and what does literacy success look like to you, La?
Beautiful question. And I think writing to me is spiritual because it helps you express yourself and in some ways connect with the Almighty, with nature, and I do believe, I'm a very spiritual person, that there is an external power that is governing us and that we can reach out to. And certainly through this book, you could see it through my emotions that I reached out.
So your protagonist is a Foreign Service officer, and I am so looking forward to reading the book. And between me and Sudhakar, we always feel that there should be a set of readings for Foreign Service officers, especially the ones who go into UN. Have you been to a UN meeting?
I'm so delighted to hear that question from no less than Her Excellency the Ambassador's wife, Mrs. Namrata Dalela. So delighted to have you here, ma'am. Yes, I have attended some UN meetings. I was in charge of, in my early years in the Commerce Ministry, in charge of India before the ESCAP, which is in Bangkok, the United Nations Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. Later, I've attended meetings in Geneva, in the not in the World Trade Organization, unfortunately, where I wanted to go. I was dealing with it, but later in my capacity as a Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Transport on conference on public-private partnerships. So I have brought in Geneva here. The book starts
yes,
with
I
Geneva.
see that. I see
And
that.
therefore, you know, and my brother was in the Foreign Service. He's no more, unfortunately.
Okay.
So I am conscious of what life in the Foreign Service is like.
Yes, and we always tell all Foreign Service officers, the younger officers, that you have to do a position in a multilateral position, because that's where you know you are first among equals. You know, everybody gets to know you, respect each and every country that's there on the planet. So thank you for writing this book, and I would really recommend it to all Foreign Service officers.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That's very, very nice.
Time to wrap up. I think we also discussed perhaps there could be a sequel for this book, because with the way the book ends, with Aman on his knees, we really don't know what it is, and we were just talking about there could be a sequel for this book, and see what life offers for Deepika Thakur and Aman Acharya. Can they come together? Because towards the end, Aman's mother, who is a horrible character, in a way redeems herself quite a bit towards the end, because Deepika had to donate her blood for her husband. But I also did tell her that is that what's needed to save someone's life, for them to accept a Dalit? If that's quite extreme, but still I think it gives us a lot of hope. I think for the world and for our society. Thank you so much, sir.